Standards and accountability might seem to be simple topics to discuss. However, political perspectives and beliefs about the basic foundations of the U.S. government and Constitution are part of the conversation. That means that this is no simple topic. We'll do our best to get you up to speed on some of the basics and help you understand how recent history has brought us to where we are today. In this presentation, you'll learn terminology and legal requirements related to students specific to disabilities, race, and culture. You'll examine schools as organizations within a historical, cultural, political, and social context with multiple stakeholders and decision makers. We'll also identify student requirements for completion of Minnesota's graduation standards. Many people aren't aware of all of the government powers that oversee our local schools. If we start at the federal level, the Department of Education is the place to begin. This is controversial, as some believe that this department, which was established by President Carter in 1979, should not exist, since it was not established in the Constitution as other areas like the Department of the Treasury. The National Department of Education is the source of categorical aid or funding that states and school districts get for complying with national initiatives. Those initiatives come with regulations and requirements, and states can opt out, but then they don't get the funds. A similar setup occurs at the state level. Minnesota's legislature establishes regulations, our Minnesota Department of Education, or MDE, carries it out, and local school districts and school boards have to find ways to make those policies work in order to get the funds and stay in compliance. In 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act established funds specifically targeted towards reading and math programs to fight the war on poverty and provide educational opportunities for students from low-income families. Through the years, other legislation and funded initiatives came through the federal government, forcing states to decide if they wanted the funds and the regulations. In 2002, ESEA was reauthorized and branded with the name No Child Left Behind. The brilliant marketing campaign was presented in a way that no one could denounce. Who could be for leaving kids behind? What became challenging was the implementation of No Child Left Behind. The issue wasn't the idea, it was the level of high-stakes testing that was regulated and the legal mandate that all students would be reading on grade level by the year 2014. Needless to say, that didn't happen, and with the 2016 reauthorization came a new name that was a bit easier to manage, but no less brilliant from a marketing perspective. The Every Student Succeeds Act will carry us into 2021, and what will come after that? We have yet to see. No Child Left Behind was the impetus for the high-stakes testing movement. In a time in our nation's history when transparency and accountability were highly valued, standardized tests became the measure published in the paper and available for anyone to judge. The biggest eye-opener was the requirement that disaggregated data groups were required. This means that test results were sorted into groups of students who were economically disadvantaged, from specific racial and ethnic groups, have identified disabilities, or limited English fluency. In this model, the achievement gap, the disparity between our affluent, non-disabled white students and nearly every other demographic, became clear to everyone. The positive side of No Child Left Behind were the requirements of states and school systems to move forward in the areas of accountability, we already talked about testing, but also in school safety, teacher quality, and parent choice. Prior to No Child Left Behind, these were ideas that were implemented in some places, but not in others. As a way of establishing a standard of practice throughout the nation, states who wanted the funding were required to implement improvements in each of these areas. The stringent requirements of No Child Left Behind ushered in a gap plan under President Obama called Race to the Top, and eventually ESSA in 2015. ESSA has maintained the same level of accountability and transparency as No Child Left Behind, but it has also allowed states some flexibility. Since hard standards such as every child will read at grade level in 2014 did not work, the new model has a focus on continuous improvement and moving students from where they are to a higher level next year. No Child Left Behind required state academic standards, but Minnesota had them long before that. They are updated by our legislature and available through the Minnesota Department of Education website. Districts are required to put state standards into place so that all students have access to high-quality content and instruction. Districts must develop local standards for subjects that don't have state standards, which is the case for business and foreign language. In Minnesota, students are required to complete two kinds of requirements by the time they graduate. Students must satisfactorily complete all state academic standards or local academic standards where state standards don't apply, and satisfactorily complete the state course credit requirements under Minnesota statutes. These requirements can be updated, but they have remained the same for several years, with 21.5 high school credits in language arts, math, science, social studies, art, and 7 elective credits being the current requirement. Students are no longer required to earn a specific score of proficiency level on any statewide assessments in order to graduate. The topic of standards always begs the question, what about kids who get special education services? The U.S. graduation requirements and the academic standards are set so that all students will have the assurance of a high-quality education. However, students who meet the criteria for special education services are provided with an individual education plan, or IEP, which means that their educational outcomes might be different than those outlined in the standards. If an IEP team determines that a student is not able to meet the standards due to their disability, modifications can be made, and they will graduate based on the requirements of their IEP. The National Governors Association Center for Best Practices and the Council of Chief State Officers developed the Common Core Standards as a means of addressing the standard requirements of No Child Left Behind. Most states adopted the Common Core, with Alaska, Texas, Nebraska, and Virginia being the only states who did not. Minnesota used the Common Core for language arts, but maintained their own standards for math. Oklahoma, Indiana, South Carolina originally adopted them and later repealed that decision. The question of Common Core standards takes us back to where we started in this presentation. Some people are concerned that Common Core suggests a national set of standards and thus reduces the power and control that states should have over their systems. Others say, if you have a good set of standards, why not share them, like we do in education, instead of having everyone recreate the wheel? Remember that standards and accountability are ever-changing in our educational system, so you'll want to be sure that you are accessing credible sources, like the Minnesota Department of Education, for the most current information.